Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'd like to take a look at some upcoming Dragapult decks from the set Twilight Masquerade. So for those of you who don't know, or would like to know the characteristics of Dragapult, it's a 320 HP Dragon type, which has two pretty decent attacks. Jet Headbutt, for one colorless, does 70 damage, which doesn't seem that impressive on the surface, but it does mean that you'll be able to get a very easy KO on evolving basics, such as Charmander, as well as stuff like Comfey, which is quite nice. But then the main appeal is for a Fire and a Psychic, which is a little bit awkward, admittedly, but we do have Earthen Vessel, we do have Energy Switch if you really want to, and we do also have Xatu. So it's not the end of the world, but for two different energy, Phantom Dive does 200 damage, which, again, isn't that impressive until you factor in the second part of the attack, which says put 6 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like. So this is just lethal against B-Barrel engines, basically, and other Xatu engines, funnily enough, and just basically any deck that has fragile Pokemon that need to evolve. So yeah, a very, very scary card. And to be honest, what scares me the most about Dragapult isn't actually this attack. It does mean that my Diplin deck will probably get destroyed by Dragapult on the ladder, to be fair, but the thing that really scares me about Dragapult is that it's a 320 HP dragon Pokemon. And because it's a dragon, it doesn't have any weakness. And so, for some reason, Pokemon, of course, decided to ditch fairies. So, if this ever gets really, really good in Standard, or very oppressive, or for example, Pokemon prints something that really helps dragons, we are supposed to be getting a special dragon set at some point in the near future. If they ever print great support for this card, there's not really anything we can do about it, because it has no weakness. It's not like Charizard, where if Charizard is still really, really, really good, Pokemon can just start printing grass Pokemon that do ridiculous things to hurt Charizard's success. Dragapult doesn't really fall into that category, which I think is something worth mentioning. But either way, on to the deck lists. Enough pessimistic. So basically, there is some new options though. Should probably talk about these first. The new Dracoloak is just really good. It's going to help with consistency. And it's no surprise, most of these lists play at least 3 or 4 copies of this Dracoloak. Also, something worth bearing in mind with Dragapult that I thought would be worth mentioning, not just the Tatsugiri, which is, yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone knows what Tatsugiri does at this point. But in case you don't know, then Tatsugiri is here. But the main thing I wanted to mention with these new A-specs is the fact that Dragapult doesn't really have a quote-unquote correct A-spec yet. In fact, the only A-spec that Dragapult doesn't seem to play, at least in Japan's lists, is mainly Maximum Belt. That seems to be the one A-spec that most of them aren't playing, which to me is also really interesting because 200 plus 50 will allow you to KO Iron Hands, which seems pretty good, right? But, most players seem to think that Hyper Aroma is really good, and Ferrostamp is obviously really good. Prime Catcher is good. Super Scoop Up Cyclone, very long A-spec. Super Scoop Up Cyclone that allows you to just pick up one of your Pokemon. Also a really good option in this deck because you're very tanky anyway. So yeah, fantastic that you're not really set in one A-spec, I should say. You could also play Neo Upper Energy to pay for that awkward attack cost, but I've not really seen many lists play that. But yeah, something worth bearing in mind. But on to the first list. We do have a Dragapult Xatu deck. I've got 2 Xatu decks in this video. I think this one is probably the simpler version, although the second one might be a little bit more simple. This one's still playing things like Radiant Alakazam, Manaphy, so you do have some tech options. Got Rotom V, got Luminion. I will look at a more simplified version, essentially, of this deck, but this is more so like if you're already a fan of, say, Charizard, then you might feel right at home with this build, with stuff like Rotom and Luminion. I'm personally not a fan of these guys because they feel like 2 prize fodder, If I want my opponent to KO all my Pokemon and take prizes, I'd much rather force them to KO Dragapults. But, still, Rotom V definitely help with consistency in the early game. And actually going on that saying that it doesn't matter if your opponent takes 2 or 4 prize cards here or there, because if you take 6 prize cards first, you win, of course. So I can kind of see that argument as well for Rotom and Luminion, but personally just not my cup of tea. And it's not why I'm a huge fan of this list, really, I'm just not really feeling it, but still, it is here, and, definitely worth mentioning as a very simple build. The next up is we have a bit more of a spicy build, and something that I'm personally very excited to try out, and that is a Dragapult, Radiant Charizard, Blood Moon Ursalona, Monkey Dory, Armarouge deck. So let's break this deck down a little bit. So basically, Monkey Dory says if it has a dark energy attached to it, once in your turn, you can move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And because you're already placing 6 damage counters with your main attack, being able to place another 3, potentially every single turn, depending on how well you get set up, is quite lethal. Now, I'm not saying that this deck is a masterpiece by any stretch of imagination. I could definitely see this list bricking up quite easily, especially needing so many Pokemon in play, especially at the right time of the game, because you don't want your engines getting KO'd immediately. You also don't want to wait too long to get them set up. But at the same time, I do think this deck will be pretty fun, actually, like all things considered, It's a weird one because Armarouge, probably should mention what Armarouge says, but basically, you can move a Fire Energy from one of your Pokemon to another Pokemon, which is just good because it means you can use Magma Basin to put damage counters on one of your bench Pokemon, so that helps with Monkey Dory. But it also means you can just accelerate energy to Armarouge, and then Armarouge moves it to Dragapult. So you lose out on the Xatu draw power, but it does mean that you can lean more into Fire, and it means you can play Radiant Charizard, but it does also mean that you have access to Monkey Dory. But again, you lose access to Xatu effectively by filling your deck with Armarouge and Monkey Dory. But still a very cool option, and I'd be interested in trying this out, also because I'm just a bit biased towards Luminous Energy. The one thing I will say about this list is the supporter Rhyme. I don't know why she's in the list. Doesn't really feel like fits a list, Doesn't feel great. However, everything else, like the Blood Moon Ursaluna, is really cool. It's basically like a beefier version of Radiant Charizard, more or less. The Monkey Dory is very cool. So yeah, big thumbs up for me on this list. But yeah, should be fun to try out at the very least, even if it's not the best version of Dragapult. The next up is we have probably the simplest build of this deck you'll ever see. One thing that I will say immediately that kind of puts me off trying this build, at least initially, and what might put a lot of people off, is the fact that this deck is a Stage 2 deck that doesn't play any rare candy. And Dragapult is your main attacker. So if you whiff Arven, or you whiff TM Evolution, then this deck might really struggle to get set up. You do have one copy of Lance, which allow you to find 3 Dragon Pokemon from your deck, which is quite cool. But aside from that, I think this list will really struggle if you just whiff, a bunch of stuff, turn 1, turn 2. Now, I think what this deck wants to try and do is use Xatu, really, to get hold of TM Evolution, so like just draw into it naturally, or draw into Arven to find it, and then set up a play where you have a load of Dracoloaks in play, and then you effectively just use TM Evolution and evolve them all at once, or at least 1 or 2, as well as evolving some Natus on the bench, for example, which is cool. And you can do this quite easily with Hyper Aroma, which is also very cool. So it is it's a fun concept, right? The whole idea of removing rare candy and just relying on TM Evolution and Hyper Aroma. But personally, I think it's a wee bit too slow for this format. Don't think this build is the most optimal way to play Dragapult, but I still think it's a really cool, idea. And if we ever find a way of making this the most consistent build of Dragapult, then maybe it doesn't matter that it's 1 or 2 turns too slow for the standard format, right? It can still get there because, Gardevoir was quite a slow deck, and that was still really, really good. So, yeah, maybe this build has a future being really good, but we'll have to see. Next up, though, is we have a Dragapult Charizard deck. I'm sure many of you are quite sick of Charizard by this point, but I thought this was worth sharing because, there are players out there who still really enjoy Charizard. So if you happen to be a huge fan of Charizard and you'd like to try out a new build with Dragapult, then here we go. Here's a list. And it's very convenient that Dragapult needs Fire Energy. So personally, I've said this before in the Greninja video. If I was to play Charizard right now, it wouldn't just be a straight build with, Pidgeot and Bibarel. I would want to play something a bit more spicy. So I think this is a good option. Got new stuff to try out. Not every day you get to play Lance in your deck or scoop up Cyclone or Tatsugiri. So yeah, very cool list. There's not really much to say about it. What can be said that already hasn't been said. You get to play 2 different Stage 2s. Still really fun. Is it consistent? Probably not, but still a lot of fun and definitely a more interesting way of playing the big Charizard himself. Next up, though, is we have a Dragapult deck with a Comfey engine. And this isn't the last list we'll look at today. There is one more list that is more focused on Lost Zone. So if you just want to dip your toes, or like maybe you're building Lost Box, or maybe you're building Dragapult, or you have like pieces from both decks, then this might be more for you. Personally, I don't think this will be a particularly great deck in Standard, but I do admire it a lot. I do think it's really cool. It is worth mentioning, however, there was a Kyurem recently revealed that says if your opponent has a Colress supporter, or just any supporter with Colress in their name, in their discard pile, Kyurem for a single colorless energy does 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. So yeah, you might get absolutely destroyed when that card comes out. You still have Manaphy though, so that's cool, but just something worth bearing in mind. So yeah. But either way, I still think this is really cool, especially if you already have the Lossum pieces. You also get access to Cramran as a single prize attacker, which I think Dragapult actually sorely lacks, is a good single prize attacker. But either way, a very cool build, and nice to see Comfey being used as a drawing gym. Next up, though, is we have a Dragapult Lossum build, and this is definitely more Lossum. You know, we've got the Saberline here, which is nice. Also features Prime Catcher, which you don't see that often in Dragapult decks, but still really cool. Also got the Delibird, which, I mean, Delibird Iron Bundle, I don't know about Delibird. I don't know if it's really that good, but some people seem to think it's really good. I'm personally not sold on it yet, but yeah. It is what it is. I do like Radiant Charizard, though. Radiant Charizard is probably my favorite Charizard card in Standard period. It's also my favorite way of playing Lost Box. Yes, I do actually play Lost Box sometimes. Once in a blue moon, but yeah. Still, very cool list. Probably not something I will be trying out, even though I like Radiant Charizard and I like Dragapult, but yeah, it's just not my cup of tea right now. I'd rather play other things and different variants of decks as opposed to a Lost Zone variant. But if you yourself are interested in this kind of thing, then this will hopefully be, right up your street. So yeah, cool for you. But either way, thanks for watching. I'm trying to keep these videos a bit more concise than I usually would do them in the past, but let me know how you think about that. I'm aware that sometimes my thoughts get very jumbled. Like, I've noticed lately my speech is like running across each other. Like, my words are just colliding all the time, and it's really annoying. So I am kind of trying to work on that as well. But I'm also trying to do more of these videos because Standard is frustrating right now. It's just a sea of Charizard and Snorlax, and it's getting real boring. I might go back to Expanded for a little bit, but Expanded has its own problems, but we'll see. But yeah, we'll see. Thank you for watching. It's been our power. Let me know what you think about Dragapult down below. Do you think it is a top tier contender potentially? Or do you think it's going to be another flop? But yeah, let me know what you think down below. And as always, thank you for watching.